Okay, hurricanes. Again, you get the spiraling in there. And what makes them spiral in is the rotation of the Earth, actually. So as the Earth is spinning, uh, the winds moving inward are going to spin as well. They're going to rotate. It's called the Coriolis effect. And now, this is probably the most famous hurricane, at least in American history. You came across here. Can you guess which one this one is? This is a picture of. By the way, you can get a sense of the scale here. Here's Florida, right? And so this hurricane is like bigger than Florida. It's bigger than a state. That's Katrina, right? It hit New Orleans. Now, to end this, after we get done with the lesson itself, the one you're doing now, I'm going to have you guys do a report on Katrina. Okay, I want you to research it, tell the story of Katrina, tell what happened, a little bit of the human side of it as well. And so that's going to be your project. But let's go ahead and go on with hurricanes lesson now. They're fueled by the heat in the seas. Go ahead and write this down. That heat builds up. Now it builds up over the course of the summer, right? So tornado season is going to be springtime because you still have the cold air up north. Well, hurricane season is going to be fall. It's going to be late summer and into fall because that's where the heat has built up long enough in the oceans. By the way, you see this hurricane? You can even see the curvature of the earth. These things are enormous. So here's the season you have. And now June, July, November, just like December, January, February, you don't have any hurricanes. Most hurricanes happen in this August to September range. So fall, and you can also have them as late as October and stuff too. And so that's going to be late summer and early fall is hurricane season. And notice it's Atlantic Ocean here. Now, we don't get hurricanes in the Pacific Northwest. It doesn't happen, and it never will happen. Okay, it's the Coriolis effect, is what I mentioned before, is what it's called, the spinning, the rotating of the Earth. Um, Makes the wind spiral inward counterclockwise. Now, it's counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere, but it's going to be clockwise in the southern hemisphere as they spiral in toward the low center area. Now, the eye of the hurricane, they have this, here you can see the eye wall. It's called, but this is the inside part. So inside the hurricane, it's clear. You can see all the way from the sea to the sky, but this is where the fastest winds are, right there in the eye of the hurricane, at the eye wall. Inside the eye, there's hardly any wind at all, but right on that edge of the inside part of the spiral, that's where the fastest winds are. And the fastest winds are at the eye wall, like I mentioned, and it's spiraling around and around. And the closer to the center you get, the faster the winds. And then in the center, you have this clear area. It's called the eye of the hurricane. Now we're going to draw a diagram now about sort of the life cycle of the hurricane. So have your piece of paper ready. Okay, so hopefully you have your paper all ready to roll. On this, what we're going to have is the hurricane. Now this one, where instead of it just being like inside the United States, let's have the United States over here. And there's Florida, and there's the Gulf of Mexico, and here's the Caribbean, and Cuba, and stuff. And here's there's okay. So this is the Atlantic Ocean. You do know that the Atlantic Ocean is off the east coast of the United States, right? So we'll just say USA here. Well, I almost have it in Canada. And then over here we have Europe. Now Europe's a little harder to draw, I guess. So let's start with the Mediterranean, kind of make it look like, oh, there's Italy. And, do it that way. And then here's Africa. Just try your best. Hopefully, let's make it look like Africa by writing this. Okay, and this is the Atlantic Ocean. So let's say what happens then in the springtime, you're not going to have many hurricanes, but as the year goes on, heat builds up in the ocean and it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. And by the way, since it's heat in the ocean, that's why they're saying if you have global warming, it's going to lead to worse storms. Well, yeah, because it's the heat that makes the hurricane happen. So the more heat you have, the more likely it is to have a big hurricane. What's going to start out is the winds blowing in this direction. These are called the trade winds. And it could start to spiral here within this low pressure area, and that would be called the tropical depression. Okay. Now, depression is like, oh, I'm so depressed. Well, it's a low pressure area, right? And so, oh, I feel depressed means you feel low, right? So it's the same word. Depression means like a low pressure area. And then if it gets big enough, it starts to really spiral around. And then it becomes what's called a tropical storm. So what's happening then is the whole weather system is moving in this direction, but here it starts to rotate as it goes along in this direction toward the United States. Now sometimes they'll just peter out there or go out in the in the ocean and just die out there and become a hurricane. But if it continues to generate energy, if it tends to get more and more heat built into it, it can tighten up and become a hurricane, and that basically the eye will form where it, it, the definition really is if it gets the sustained winds of 73 miles an hour or higher is when they will call it a hurricane. Hurricane. Okay, so the hurricane, it might end up hitting Florida, might go off in the coast. What's going to end up happening though, eventually, let's say it hits here, it's going to turn off in this direction. Now, once it hits land, it loses its energy source because its energy comes from the hot water and the heat in the ocean. And so it'll start breaking up and slowing down. It can still make massive amounts of rain, but it's mostly on the coastlines that is dangerous. Now, it might go through the Gulf of Mexico, like the one that Katrina did, and hit there. And once it could go up the coast, there's a lot of different paths that the hurricane can take. But they're always going to go and up out that direction, and they lose strength as they head north because it starts getting colder, right? And also if it gets over dry land because it doesn't have that warmth of the ocean there. So that's kind of the life cycle of a hurricane. Okay, so here you can see there's the coast of Africa, and here's the Caribbean. This is why most hurricanes hit down here in Florida and Cuba and the Bahamas and that area. They can hit higher north in the United States. They can come across the Gulf of Mexico and hit New Orleans. They can actually even go across Mexico. Uh, what we have here now, there can be a lot of variety in how bad hurricane seasons are. Some seasons have a lot of hurricanes, some don't have very many, and it seems to go in these 24-year cycles. Here you can see these are the hurricanes from 59 to 70, 1995 to 2006. And we're kind of coming out of another light area, and they are getting heavier. A lot of people believe it's because of the added heat to the ocean because of climate change. But what I do want you to notice is how they come this direction and then they go off that direction. That's because you have a global wind belt, which we would have been learning about if we'd had the whole school year, where here we have the trade winds and here we have the prevailing westerlies. Here in the continental United States, the winds tend to go in this direction. So that's what kind of pulls the hurricanes back out of their cycle and heading up north. This here is basically all the tracks over a lot of years of hurricanes, right? And they color coded them to be when they were category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, you can see they come out of Africa, and then here's where they hit, and they tend to peter out when they hit the continental U.S. They lose that dark color. Category 4, Category 5, the worst hurricanes might hit landfall, but they're not going to stay that category once they're on the land. They can generate that heat in the Gulf of Mexico, like Katrina did, or they can actually come across Mexico and then build up again after they're on the other side. Right? Here's one, kind of went off. Now, there's no way we could be hit by a hurricane. Could we potentially, eventually, someday get hit by the remnants of a hurricane where you just get a lot of rain? Yes, that could happen. And here, do you remember what I called the hurricanes that happen in Asia? They don't call them hurricanes. They call them what? What? Typhoons. And some typhoons actually can be at least as strong as hurricanes. The most powerful of the storms have been typhoons. Now, the high winds can be a problem. They can blow things around, and it can definitely be a problem. But the biggest danger in a hurricane is the storm surge. Where the storm surge is, basically the high winds can blow the water onto the dry land, right? And that can make the water come up on the land, and of course that can, flood areas. It can inundate. People can get washed out to sea, and people drowning is the biggest cause of death in a hurricane. The storm surge is by far the biggest danger. Here's an area that got flooded, right? That's during Katrina. And this is Hurricane Katrina right here. So that's going to be your project part of this assignment for this week, okay? I'd like you to get this assignment done by the end of today, but get it out of the way. But then they'll have a week to do this other one. It doesn't have to be a giant, like before. I'm not going to make it this huge research project where you got to spend 12 hours on it. But you should spend at least a couple hours on doing this research. Hurricane Katrina, K-A-T, Katrina. And you should have it be 4 slides where you discuss like the hurricane itself, how hurricanes are generated, where, the little bit of the human impact of this is going to have to be an important part of it. And also the recovery. I'd like that to be a part of it as well. Don't think of it, it has to be 1 slide per each, but just make 4 slides minimum. Find out, learn about it, and show what you learned, okay? I am going to require that you use 3 separate sources on this, and please cite your sources. So think of it as 5 slides then. 4 for content with pictures and text, okay? Pictures, and text. And then 1 citing your sources, okay?